Just kind of a little discussion about my experience with Hurricane Dorian. If you live in Florida or any other area that frequently is threatened by hurricanes, you're probably not going to find this video very interesting. I'm not going to be showing a lot of shots of cars flying through the air or anything like that. And it's more of a kind of an investigation into the emotional logistics of dealing with having one of the most destructive forces on the planet bearing down on you when you've never been through that kind of thing before. So to give a little background, the original plan was bring the boat into Florida, fix it up, and then be underway and moving long before hurricane season, months before hurricane season, and then be in a position to get somewhere out of the hurricane zone by the time hurricane season came along. Unfortunately, projects didn't go as fast as I wanted to. Things came up. Just in general, a lot of little things conspired to the point that I realized that hurricane season was starting. I wasn't ready to leave. I had to make a decision. And the decision I made is that this marina, and I'll have some footage here, but this marina I'm in Fort Pierce here is designed to withstand a Category 3 hurricane. I am back in here. I'm in one of the most sheltered areas of the marina, and there are some real benefits to this marina. The first being that I'm way back in one of the most sheltered areas. The second one being this stone barrier that goes the whole way around the outer side of the marina. That, in combination with the island that you can see out there further, is going to block the worst of the waves. The waves, there's not going to be a lot of waves. There is still going to be a storm surge, which means with the wind and the low pressure, the waters are going to rise up a lot. And as you can see, there's no mountains. There's some trees out on the island and stuff, but there's not a lot to block the wind. When I look back at some statistics and stuff, I figured the most likely thing to happen this summer was for a Category 3 or lesser hurricane to hit this part of Florida. I figured, again, looking at storm statistics, there was a small but possible chance that we wouldn't get hit by anything. And there was a small but possible chance that we get hit by something really big. But by and large, the most likely thing to happen is to get hit by a smaller storm that, would be inconvenient and, a little bit dangerous, but if you handled it properly and prepped for it, would be able to ride it out with minor or no damage. And when you compare that to, let's take a boat that is not well proven and, probably hasn't had a chance to be tested. All the repairs and upgrades are literally just finished. And me going by myself, not having a lot of experience with the new boat, with the new area, and that sort, and also long distance cruising at all. I've only ever done short trips. It seemed to me much riskier to try to start moving and risk the possibility of getting stuck somewhere much less protected. And then a hurricane comes. You look, the Carolinas get hit with these things. So going north, if I get to the Carolinas and I start having engine problems, or for some reason I get stuck there, and I don't have a marina to go to, and all of a sudden there's a hurricane threatening the Carolinas, so it made sense to me to stay here for the summer, and just kind of wait this out, cross my fingers that the worst case scenario doesn't happen, and be ready to go in the fall when things are safe again, weather-wise. And so I get up every morning, whatever else I'm working on that day. One of the first things I do is, while I'm eating my breakfast, I pull out the computer and I check the forecasts. And, the U.S. Oceanic, the NOAA website, they have a hurricane section for the website. So you just check it every day and see, if there's any pending threats. And I got up the one morning, and there was this little storm called Dorian, way out in the Atlantic, that was predicted to be maybe a Category 2 and a slight chance of hitting Florida, but it was several days away, and it didn't really look like it was going to get very big. And I'm not making this up. This is exactly what I saw that morning. And I went about my day, and sometime mid-afternoon, a friend who lives in the southern part of Florida calls to ask, "What are you doing about the hurricane?" I was like, it's kind of a funny conversation, because from the morning when I checked the forecast to mid-afternoon, the forecast had changed from minor storm, slim chance of even getting to Florida, to this is going to be a big one, and it's coming right for you, and it's probably going to be a Category 4. So this is, this is a pretty close to worst case scenario. This is Tuesday around, early in the morning, late Monday night, around midnight. The storm is predicted. This is one, obviously there's different models because we're still several days away, but not everybody agrees on exactly where this is going to come. But this is one model. It's showing it coming ashore around Boca Raton, that area. Here I am in Fort Pierce. This is not quite worst case scenario, but it can only get a little bit worse. This is supposed to be a Category 4 at this point. The only way this storm could get worse is to go to Category 5. There's no Category 6, so it's pretty bad. You may think that getting hit with the actual storm itself is the worst, but actually being slightly to the north of it is worse because you have the wind coming in from the ocean, which is very strong. And here I am up to the north, so if this moves even a little bit further north, we're going to get hammered anyway, but if it moves a little bit further north, we're going to get hammered really bad. If that's not enough, the National Weather Service model is even more pessimistic. Here's Port St. Lucie, there's Melbourne. Fort Pierce is about right here, so it shows the eye of the hurricane coming right through Fort Pierce. And as you can see, they're predicting 130 mile an hour winds, gusting to 160 mile an hour. That's bad. So I started preparing. And I had, at this point, the forecasts are very liable to change. But never having done this before, I thought, what, I would rather go overboard, have things done too early. What if I start doing some kind of prep and then somebody explains to me that this is not the right way to do it, or somehow I just decided this isn't the best way to do it. I want the opportunity to make mistakes in my hurricane prep and redo them. So I started prepping the boat pretty much immediately. I think the thing that really surprised me, and I guess if you're used to this, there's a little bit of panic involved for me. And I think people who are used to seeing storms come right at them on a map are a little less likely to panic because it's something you've experienced before. And the number of people who just kind of sat back and say, yeah, I guess we're going to see what happens. And, I had other boaters who, I know that I can get my boat storm prepped in about 5 or 6 hours. So I'm not going to start until I know for sure we're getting hit with a storm, and then about 5 or 6 hours before I have to evacuate, I'll do the storm prep. So they wait till literally the last minute because they have that kind of confidence that they can get their storm prep, and I didn't have that. So if you're not familiar, and again, if you're a sailor or whatever, this is all, the people around here, the town, they put metal shutters on all the windows. If they don't have metal shutters, they buy, all the home stores sell out of plywood. They screw plywood up to the windows and that sort of. So the whole town, as you start getting closer and closer to the storm getting here, the whole town just turns up. But, some people started early like me. Other people were holding off and kept saying, and I kept looking at it and going, geez, every time I looked at it, the closer it gets, the more reliable the forecast is. And I kept looking at it and kept seeing it coming straight at Fort Pierce. And there was a point where the forecast, early on the forecast was showing it probably hitting around Fort Pierce, but it might go south and it might go north. It might, the whole east coast of Florida was in danger for a while. And then it got to a point where the forecast started to change. The forecast showed it hitting Florida and then heading north. And nobody was really predicting any possibility of going south. And all of the power boats disappeared from the marina. Which makes sense, because once you know with good reliability which way that storm's going, if you have a power boat, whether it be a trawler or just a small, you can do hundreds of miles a day depending on how many hours, how many people you've got crewing the boat and how long you can run. You can get out of the path easily. And as that happened, myself and a few other boat owners, we sat down, we had dinner together, and we discussed running because the storm was going to come right for us. And it was basically, I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. If Category 4 hits this spot, the storm surge is going to rise the water so much that it's going to pull the boat right off the moorings. They were predicting water to rise, and again, assuming that it had actually hit us directly. You saw the Bahamas and how much water they got and how much the water rose. The prediction was that the water would rise near the top of these. Now, that one and the ones back there are higher, but you can imagine the boat, and this is why all my lines are so far up, is so that the boat can rise. And like this line that is down here is so loose intentional, so there's a lot of room for it to come up. But still, imagine that. Imagine the water that high above the docks and the boat. And with the wind, if a line snapped, the wind could push it over the pilings and onto the next boat or over the dock, and it would be very, very difficult to reliably tie a boat when the water comes up 20 feet. With the wind moving over 100 miles an hour, it's going to get blown out of the marina and into the parking, because the parking lot's going to be 10 foot underwater. And then when the water, assuming that it doesn't get blown into a building or something, which is very likely, the most likely scenario at the end of that storm is that my boat has managed to avoid wrecking into anything, but it's now sitting grounded in the parking lot, and I need to pay a crane to put it back in the water. I mean, and that's like the most likely, that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario involves the boat being in so many pieces that I can't even get a good picture of all the pieces. It's not a survivable storm. It's just not. And that's the reality of it. And so we met and we decided we're going to run. There was 3 of us. Well, 3 boats, 4 sailors. So we started working out the logistics over dinner. We had to get very far south to, Miami, to be far enough away from the storm winds to feel like we were safe. And that's a long way. And we had about 3 days, we figured, to get there. And we started working on logistics, and we started looking at how many miles we needed to make a day. And it was a lot. And if you're single-handed, 10 or 12 hours at the helm is exhausting. And to do that for 3 days straight. And I've never done that kind of thing. So I don't know that I'm capable of it until you try to do it. So to do it under duress, and you think if you don't make it, you're now out there anchored in the ICW somewhere with hurricane force winds. You're not in good. That's bad. That's really, really bad. That's way worse than. And the other problem is all 3 of the boats were still here. There's 3 boats that the owners did not want them in the hurricane zone, but because of repairs or maintenance or whatever, weren't able to get them out of the area prior to the hurricane season coming along. So we had 3 boats that were unproven. So I brought up, here's the thing, is if we do this, if any of the 3 boats breaks down or has any kind of serious problems, that boat gets anchored where it is, the sailor transfers to another boat, and we keep going and we leave it behind. Because it's just too dangerous to try to stop and try to fix it. We don't have time. And that sat well with nobody. But it was worse than that, because the more we started looking at it, if we try to go down the ICW and the bridges don't open, and heading south into open ocean can be really challenging. If you have harsh winds, you're going against the Gulf Stream. It's a very, very challenging sail. You don't want to do it under duress. You don't want to do it on a boat that you're still not 100% sure all the systems are working correctly. That sort of thing. So if one of the drawbridges on the ICW doesn't open for any reason whatsoever, mechanical difficulties or whatever, or anything happens on the ICW that blocks our way, maybe there's an accident or something. There's so many things that could go wrong, which would be a massive inconvenience under normal circumstances. But under this circumstances, we were running from a storm, could be deadly. And we looked at it, and just literally every single thing had to go right for us to be able to run and make it out of the hurricane zone, or to get far enough away from the affected area to be safe. And we realized it was too dangerous. It was too dangerous to try to do it. And I went back to the boat that night and cried myself to sleep. I'll admit it. Because I was absolutely certain that I was going to lose everything. It just occurred to me, if I lose the boat, I'm going to have to come to grips with the fact that I lost the boat. This wasn't, I mean, there's bad luck in this, but there were numerous opportunities where I could have put myself in a better situation, a less risky situation. But I was overworked, I was too tired, I just didn't have the energy, and you can make I can make all those excuses, but the reality of it is, the scary reality of it is, if I lose the boat to this storm, none of those excuses are going to make me forgive myself. The thought of all the work I put into this, I mean, just literally pushing myself to the breaking point to try to make this happen. And if I lose the boat, never having done what I wanted to do, I don't know if I'll be able to forgive myself. I wasn't worried about me. I had an evacuation plan. Now, granted, there's still the chance something could go wrong, but honestly, the evacuation plan, I was comfortable enough with the evacuation plan that I was more worried about getting a car accident driving to the shelter than I was anything else. But, the boat, I was going to lose it. I was absolutely certain I was going to lose it. And I got up the next morning, and there was a text on my phone that says, you need to check the weather. And up to this point, it had been all bad news, so I was pretty reluctant. But that was overnight. That was when they changed the prediction that the hurricane was going to turn north before it hit the coast of Florida. And I suddenly had that huge, maybe I'll actually come out of this. And even at that point, you got to remember, it's still a prediction. It might not, and it became this process of working on getting the boat ready to withstand storm winds, because at this point, exactly where the storm turned, how close did it get to Florida before it turned, that kind of thing, was going to have a massive impact on exactly how much wind we got, and wind, storm surge, all those, how much of the storm we got, how close was it going to come to Florida, and every time we would check, they were predicting it staying a little farther out to sea. So I have the boat with, everything stripped off of it. The sails are down, all the canvas is off, took the solar panels down, took everything off the top of the boat possible. Went around and bought 300 foot of cheap dock line and basically doubled up every dock line that I had. Carefully tied the boat as best I could so it could go up and down, and it would still be, I wouldn't. The problem is if you just tie the boat straight down to the dock, when the water rises, the boat gets stuck and the water's still rising and the boat can't go up like it needs to, and you put a tremendous amount of force and it could break those lines or pull the, whatever they're tied to off and everything. So you've got to tie the lines in a way, they call them spring lines, so as the boat goes up and down, the lines allow it to do so. So I got all that set up. Again, if you have a boat, you know all this. But so I got all that set up, and every one of those lines, there were 2 of them, so it was twice as many lines as I needed. So if somehow I lost one due to stress or whatever reason, I wouldn't, the boat would still be, the boat's tied really well. And the happy ending to this is that the storm turned. It's a bittersweet ending. Because on the one hand, the Bahamas experienced phenomenal destruction, loss of life, loss of property. I mean, just the loss is just incredible. And then parts of the Carolinas got, some abuse. And I mean, the Bahamas, there's so much focus on the Bahamas because they took the brunt of the storm. And, sometimes I actually feel guilty because to a large degree, the storm turned the storm stopped over the Bahamas and turned north, and the Bahamas got hit so much worse than they might have if the storm had just kept coming. It might have been less damaging to them. So it almost feels like my fortune is their disaster sometimes, and it's just the weather. I didn't cause it to turn, but sometimes it feels weird to be glad that it did when other people suffered from it so much. I'm very grateful. I know exactly how lucky I am. And I also know that it's still hurricane season, and there's lots of opportunities. There's several weeks, almost a month of storm season where my luck could still go bad. I still think I made the right decision. I think it would have been very dangerous for me to try to run at the beginning of the season. Things were not ready, and a number of people tried to convince me to run. Get out of the hurricane zone before hurricane season gets here. But I feel like the risks were a lot higher. I was having problems with engine leaks. I had that point where the engine just wouldn't start. I just wasn't confident that everything was. There's always that chance that things are going to go wrong and something's not going to work right. But I feel like I'd had 20 miles of motoring on that boat since I did all that work on it, and it's been it hadn't run before that in almost 2 years. So I just feel like there's a lot more shakedown that needs to be done before I seriously considering a long trip. So I stand by my decision to stay here. Wow. Didn't feel like it was that much wind until I got out of the car. I don't know if it just picked up or what. How you doing, baby? She's good. So despite my duct taping and everything, I still get a little bit of water in here, but it doesn't look like much at all. It smells awful. Ugh. I mean, I've got the boat so freaking the boat is so sealed up so tight there's almost no circulation. But I got, because the storm wasn't that big, now the biggest mess I have to clean up is the mess that I made prepping the boat for the storm. Did I get a lot of leaks? I did get a lot of leaks. These need to dry out. My chain plates leak when it rains real hard, and I think we did get some pretty serious rain here. It's not very damp in here though. It's actually not noticing any moisture at all, which is good. Seems like the duct tape on the hatch trick sealed it up for now. It's time to get everything cleaned up. And the reality of it is in the end, nothing ever got really worse than, I mean, I've been on the boat when a thunderstorm rolled through. That was worse than anything we saw during the hurricane. So, I mean, we got really lucky. It stayed far enough offshore that it was just like a bad day of storms for us. So, that's my story. Not as exciting as some other people's stories, but I gotta tell you, I'm kind of thankful it wasn't that exciting. I'm glad.